Hi.
Good morning.
Morning, Peter.
Munching away, trying to do it as quietly as possible. And avoiding having my orange squirt all over the laptop keyboard, which would be bad.
Are you speaking, Freda? I think you're muted. Or you're not. Sorry, you're wrong, mic.
How about now?
Yep.
Much better.
Okay, well, that's very odd. Yeah, I was just going to say that we have this issue. So I'm going to make them less tall, these images. Should only take a minute, actually, because there's this magical thing called cropping in the world. So how are you, Peter? Other than hungry?
Very good. Other than hungry, I'm good. It's a nice, bright, sunny day. I might be able to get a little gardening done later on.
Very good. What did you say later on?
Gardening.
Did you say gardening or gardening?
Sort of a New York expression. Gardening. Sort of like a New York expression for when you're gardening, but not in the garden, but the rest of the yard.
Ah. Okay.
So you smash yard and gardening together and get gardening.
Never heard that expression, but that's cool. Very cool. Right, so I'm just gonna remove these. I think it's kind of important that some of these things that represent all of us are, we all agree on them. So where is everyone else today? Oops.
Just a quick thought, seeing that, but when you get back to the original page you're on.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just a bit where you done one of those images, and it says something like Fabian did this. It might be useful in those bits just to put in the full name so that it gets picked up. It's more likely someone might search on first name, but those who obviously aren't here all the time may not necessarily get the prompt from the first name. Though I would admit that Fabian and Brandel who turn up there are probably less obvious than some.
Yeah, that should be okay. Brandel, what's his last name again?
Zakhanuk.
Thanks.
Zakhanuk. Oh gosh.
No, I remember now. It's just that I did the K is so strong. So
I think that spelling, I'm not sure that spelling is correct, but bear with me a second. I can look.
It is. No, it's not.
Okay, cool.
It's not. What's going on? Okay, let me fix that. Hi, Fabian.
Hello.
I'm not sure if this is right. I'm just adding screenshots of what's already done. Just thought that was something we could just have a quick look at together. Okay, with it, that's it. How do I, it usually doesn't autocomplete. Isn't that right? No. ZHCH, Airnuke. Okay, that makes more sense, doesn't it? Yeah, that's the one.
That's it.
Just export that so we can have something fresh to look at because the layout here went to pieces. So Fabienne, thank you again for the last closing minutes of last chat, the one on Friday where you suggested tying Friday a little bit with Doug Engelbart's. So in so doing, I've been playing around a little bit with a brief presentation and also talked a little bit to Carl, who is kind of a really educated Doug person as well. He may present a few words like a bit of a Doug glossary. But once this is exported, and my computer's way overloaded, I'll just turn off a few things. Yeah, 250,000 words takes a while to deal with. Ah, you made me go over by 1 word, Mark. Ah.
Sorry.
You are just a monster. Okay. Let me just see.
Well, actually, you in that bit, for what it's worth, you actually mentioned the person twice, I think, or then one below. You said like Fabian recorded a. I'm sure we could play with that somehow to get that. Just to explain to the others, it just occurred to me watching this that actually people who don't come to sort of as often as this may not know, you know, Fabian or Brandel, for instance, by immediately by first name. It just helps them pick up, because I think it's actually good and important there that people have an idea where some of these ideas came from and the people who did them.
Yeah. Yours is not so important
get people
here,
to change
Fabian,
their names
because-
to shorter names by deed poll.
Yes. Fabian, yours is the least important here because you're doing a completely fresh one, aren't you? So you can choose whether you
Let's
want
see.
both or, well, even what you've been doing recently is, oh, F's sake, hang on. This should be level 2.
It's also a love-hate relationship that the closer it gets to let's say the deadline, some things must exist, and as those things start to exist, they give the room for new ideas, and then there is less and less time and more ideas. So it's challenging. Will it even work or look like anything at the end? I don't know, but yes, they're going to be showing something different.
I'm a bit annoyed that you wrote a full article saying PDF is not good for VR, because obviously, you know, it's combative, and, you know, I don't say that this should only be VR, but on the positive side, you have actually written articles. And the reason I'm saying that now is the stuff you're talking about. That's the whole point. You know, if you write down a piece saying, I started doing this thing, here was my plan, and then it went all haywire, I ended up with this, but this other thing is what I want. That's actually what this whole thing is about. This is more blue sky, experimental, back of the envelope type publication rather than dry, finished, boring academic results, you know? So, oh, for crying out loud, really? It's still...
I'll just say, Fred and I earlier were having a discussion on basically well, we perhaps disagreed on what I would call print-based layouts versus digital-based layouts, which is, and there's no right or wrong here, but I mean, it is frustrating here when you're trying to basically have a layout of a particular type, and because I mean, in a sense, I suppose if you're doing this in desktop publishing, you do something crafty with the fonts and the kerning just to squeeze that bit in, which probably most people wouldn't notice. But just trying to do it,
Microtype.
I totally understand it's hard.
What did you say?
Microtype. There's a micro typography package in LaTeX that will cause, well, it has like a protrusion option that will push punctuation marks out into the margin space, allowing you to pack more lines onto a page by a very slight amount, but it's enough so it would easily eat up an extra word flowing onto one more page than you wanted.
Very smart.
Yeah, I mean, that's what, when we did.
What it does is, it tries to form a straight optical margin as opposed to where the character boxes actually end. So it'll pull things out to make them visually line up based on human perception, as opposed to the exact metrics of where the glyph boxes have their bounding box.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of typography is what we did with the first volume in Illustrator, where the bottom column was one line, but there was extra space in case there was that overflow of something. It's a bit difficult to put into Author, though, but I would like to be able to tweak the page layout a little bit more. However, an issue with that then becomes when you press the Z button to go zoomed in, suddenly you're kind of screwed. Okay, I think we got it, except we have a break too much at the end here. Let me just export that, and then we can move on to actual things. Oh, what heading level is that? Oh, yeah, that's
level 3.5.
No, that's one. Good. I was just wanting to make sure it was. It should be. Right. So once I'm done with this now, which I think I am with this export, I'm going to send it to Mark, who will get some fun going and looking at other issues. I expect that there will be issues when we go to press because it's just so big. Issues will probably be around endnotes and few odd references and stuff, but we should at least have it readable. So to end of tomorrow, Fabian, I aim to be able to export to HTML and put the JSONs out and all that good stuff. I have not been able to modify the JSON as you requested, but I think if you send that to me in the form of a brief article, I would really like to include that in the book as something, because as I said last time we talked, or whenever, I said to you, it made me really happy to have that request because it is a real world request. It's not us sitting here talking generally. It actually is about a use case. So, what could possibly be better? Okay, so here we go. So we have on this page, this is all the editor's introduction. We have these experiments. And no, making this come lower is actually not easy. And then we go into the brief thoughts. So here's the book, just show you guys. There will be a slightly more not so bad cover. The contents, now that we put in subheadings, there's a lot of them. And if you look at Fabian here, so each person is level 1, because that's how we've decided that's what matters. Level 2 is the articles. So many people just have one. So Fabian has quite a few. And then inside, for instance, journal, there's code sample. Inside this journal guest presentation, actually, that's journal shouldn't be there. Yes. You're muted, Fabian.
So the code sample is something I had in mind, but I wasn't sure actually existed, which is a problem, but that might be an interesting one because, of course, as I wrote an article on against books, And one of the spoilers for those who didn't read it yet is that I find computational notebooks more interesting than just a book to read, because we can play with it, something more active, without having to be a developer, just because there is code. But the point was that I would hope that somebody reading a book that does include code can play with the code itself. So providing either a virtual machine or an environment to play with that. And I was thinking, if one does read the code in the book in VR, and that book does include code, they should be able to play with that code in VR directly. I don't really know how to do this, but I think it's definitely interesting and coherent with what was discussed before. So I'm wondering if, of course, there is any metadata about this. Can I know that the code is code there, and can I exploit it? Can I use it?
Visual meta. Stick it in there. I know it's just the thing. Legally, I'm obliged to say that. But
actually, there's sorry. Go ahead.
No. If it's on that point, please continue.
Well, it's on the general point of the. It's really interesting. Just as Fabian was saying, I absolutely get this point about they're suddenly going forward, be more interested in having a book in the general sense that you can do something with. Then I mean, in the way that a pop-up book is a bit more exciting than one that's just got flat pages. An interesting sort of challenge that comes to me out of that is thinking how one approaches that for a wider audience. Because if you know how, if you know how to code and coding doesn't seem weird and odd or scary, then it's sort of, in a sense, almost self-evident that things like this should be good. If it is still something that you may know, but it's done by somebody else, in other words, you don't have an intimate understanding of it. So I sort of part as an interesting thought of how to sort of write the book to tell you how to write your first sort of active book. I don't know what we call them, active notebook. That doesn't come from a perspective of someone who has really much of an understanding of writing computer code.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think we agree. Right. Okay. So hang on. Did I close the book now suddenly? Didn't mean that. Yeah. The other thing was for the presentation on Friday. This is where I started. Sorry, guys. So Fabian, don't try not to
interrupt because you did not answer. Today, if I take the liquid file, can I know that that code snippet is code?
Hang on, I just had a problem with how your article was. Hang on, just 1 second. 1 second. Okay.
Oh, before I forget, I just wanted to drop in a little historical note. The idea of having the system help you go off and run some code that you're looking at was alluded to sort of sideways, halfway-ish in JCR Licklider's Libraries of the Future text. And that goes way, way, way back. So we should have like a little historical note that line of thought of having the system prepare and make data files associated with something that you're reading about available to you, use actively, dates that far back in history.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Vint Cerf calls it computational text. So, there are different ways. Now, Fabian, to answer your question as well as I can, which isn't all that great, to read visual meta in a PDF, all the system really needs to do is parse from the end of the document, because obviously that's where it is. So if it finds the curly brackets visual meta end, then it knows, okay, it is here, and then I'm now going to parse it. What it gets out of that parsing is, of course, a different thing altogether. The basic stuff is super simple, how to cite the document and so on. But if there is actual code, there is no provision for that now. But I would absolutely love to develop it in a way where, like we've said earlier, if for some reason somebody wants to have, let's say, a computational chart with an X and Y axis, why not put it in HTML? It's not code in the active sense, but at least it's an understandable, parsable format. So all of that stuff, as long as it says something along the lines of, on page 252, the bit that starts with this actually has this HTML data behind it, or this JSON data behind it. I actually don't care at all. I only care that it should be usable for you, because you're the one who would use it. But before I share screen again, to go back to the book, I just wanted to this is just so cool, and I thank you again, Fabian, again and again and again, because just to repeat for everyone else, Fabian suggested, because we're doing 9th of December, the 54th anniversary of Doug's demo, you know, we may frame it a bit around him. What he actually said in the beginning of his demo, he asked, what if in your office, you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display backed up by a computer which was alive for you all day and instantly responsive to every action you have? How much value could you derive from that? Right? He didn't say computer first, he said display. How cool is that? And how easy is it to extend that into what can we now have in VR? So I talked for a few seconds about, we've looked at the computer, but let's focus on the first part of what he said. What would Doug want to do in this environment? So go a little bit into him, a little bit what we've done, and so on. Pretty cool, right? Yeah, so cool. Yeah, so in our book here, go back to the beginning. So we have these, and you can see here, oh God, I'm so embarrassed with his name. He has a huge amount of headings. I've really made it really clear, because I think it's I'm so grateful to have this description of an actual system in here. You know, why he did it, what the different things are. It's just really cool. So he's taking forever pages. And as a personal note to you, all my good friends here, yesterday my mother came over. So I asked her to put on her glasses and read the copyright page. So she was reading copyright, blah, blah, blah. And then she saw that it's dedicated to her. And her eyes got very glassy and wet. So I thought that was quite cute. On the next page, this is also important because there's 3 sentences here that I hope we agree on. Number 1, this publication has gone over a decade of annual symposia on the future of text. This symposium and book is an experiment and experience, as is everything we do. Bold text and transcripts is by the editor, sometimes by the speaker. I think both Fabian and Marcus pointed out the need for that. I talk about experiment and experience quite a lot in my pieces. Doug calls it bootstrapping. So I hope I will be able to properly mention that in the little presentation. And here are 2 pages to piss you off, because here I'm saying that in my personal software, oh, I'm so good, you can read the book in better ways with arrow keys and stuff. So I'm hoping that both Fabian, Brandel, and others will get so annoyed and want to make more powerful reading experiences than what this is. Yeah, and then I think we just go into the normal stuff. And I just added this, you were here. I hope to have whatever you want, Fabian. You can have a 2-page spread after this with the several screenshots if you want, obviously linked to video. We can do screenshots from the video, but because you're the only one doing actual this book in VR, I think it deserves a lot of space. And if you want to write a lot or little about what the heck you're trying to do, you know, that's up to you. If I can have it by the end of tomorrow, because your piece should be easy to proof, you know, it's not going to be that long. It's okay that it comes in after everyone else. And then we have all this normal
Right,
stuff.
just a quick thought, thinking ahead. You're referencing your comment and the last line in that sort of introduction piece. Perhaps in your introduction, it's also worth it, you know, en passant, just drawing out this fact about the bolding in text, and perhaps just drawing the extra inference that this is something that's emerged from the conversation we're having, and it's part of a dynamic sort of discussion about the sort of effectively old-fashioned tables of contents as we're used and educated to them, as opposed to a not antagonistic but different approach of flagging important points. And, you know, that sort of links to some of the things that Bob's talked about, but it just helps us bring this point. Oh, right. So this is what's happening where stuff's being bolded up in otherwise similarly ad hoc fashion. It really is deliberate intent, and the reader should engage with it as such, rather than thinking, I didn't expect to see that bolded.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of interesting because one of my partners from long ago, she hated it when I bolded intros to paragraphs. But then you have Bob and Jim saying, bold, bold, bold. So, you know, we have taken a decision somewhere in the middle. And I think, yes, we need to kind of, I mean, if you want to write that a bit clearer, Mark, I'm happy to paste that in. But I think it's absolutely fine.
You must, on that page, you've got first paragraph for the new section. You in bold. You've got metadata is. You've got you're missing an N, an I, and an N. You've got explain. Data is explain.
Thank you. This is a piece that I'm still working on, but I will.
That's fine.
No. I'm very grateful.
Well, yeah, no. I would fully accept my first response to the sort of this use of bolding was that I read it as formatting, and it confused me. I totally get what Bob and Jim are coming from, and it's actually quite fluid what they're saying. It's not that, you know, you're bolding the sort of first half of the opening sentence of the paragraph or something like that, though you can. It's more about that this bit of text is guiding you in an abstractive sense to the key concept here, and probably so that the writing works. It may well not be the sentence beginning of the paragraph or the end of the paragraph, and I'm sure that method gets better with more use. And you know, so what we're trying to do is do more of that here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying. Okay, here we have. This is probably. You see, I really don't like having at level a title and then a heading immediately. For some people have used the word abstract, and I've deleted it because the first paragraph before a heading, that is an introduction / abstract anyway, right? But the main reason we've done the bolding, that is in the transcripts, to try. Okay, let's go find Fabien because he's here. So we go Fabien. Yeah, here's Fabien's presentation. So every time there is a chunk without a line, I put in a bolding of what I think it is about, and it seems Fabien so far has agreed, or rather not been too upset. I'm trying to do the images relatively cleanly to where it is. So you see, trying to pull out a few things, because there's a lot of stuff here. Here's an example of what I mean in dialogue with the rest of us. Here we're talking about legacy books going into VR. You know, that's it. There should probably be a view of the book that is only the bold text, maybe. I don't know. I mean, look at all this. This is just one presentation. Very few people is going to read every word.
But this is a bit like having, I mean, you're right, but the issue isn't that anyone would expect or want to read every word. It's more that when you come to a link that you can then go back to its context. And that's the point at which you might want to read stuff that otherwise you wouldn't bother to, because it's contextual and should give some richness to what you've looked at.
Yeah.
So that, to me, you know, that's the point of bothering to sort of memorialize it at all.
So, yes. So also, Mark and I earlier today, we talked about the glossary. I've removed a lot of words from the glossary. Actually, I'm going to rebuild it because there is a bug in this document. It's gone through so many versions of the software, it gets really, really messy. So I'm just going to select. Selecting everything is going to take like 10 minutes. But, you know, when we go through the glossary here, it is actually quite clean and easy to read now. It doesn't have any funny markups. So I'm going
to Alan in twice.
What's that?
You got Alan in twice.
Oh, thank you. And
Bottom
also,
right.
I have a break here that I need to fix, but it's going to take a while to get this back because of the command.
Apologies, I can't turn off the copy editing site.
No, I'm super grateful. People do get in touch with me still now, every couple of months, saying, I found a bug in your first book, a typo. Okay, what do you want me to do with it? It's published, but thank you anyway.
Well, it shows they've read it,
What's that?
It shows they've read it. Or,
Yeah.
well, in the digital age, maybe they did. Maybe they just ran a spell checker on it. But in the old days, you actually had to read it by eye to spot the errors.
I think we're incredibly lucky to come together to make this book now, because obviously AI-assisted writing is just taking off now. And we have quite a few references to that. And VR work has not happened yet, but clearly we've demonstrated that it can. So if we take this as our stake in the ground, state of the art from now, what we do next year is going to be really interesting. Talking of which, Fabian, I agreed to something earlier via Twitter without having any clue what you're on about. You wanted to have an event at the Mondaneum. What is your thinking about that?
Well, we did like cards and sorting cards in London. What was it? 3 months ago, 4 months ago. So we can do it again with more cards. So there is in Mons, so not too far from Brussels, there is a museum dedicated to classification of all documents ever. So a pre-internet kind of ways to sort, organize, play with information.
Yeah.
Yes, it's we can go beyond, let's say, just the Linnean society. So it's a nice small town. It's, I think, relatively easy to access, including from London. And
Are
it
you
would be
wearing
for
your,
the,
hang on, you're wearing your Linnean tie?
Yes, you did not see it before, but of course.
Excuse me, I'll be right back.
I wonder where he's going.
Yes, well, we. Yes, I mean, funny enough, I've been to Mons because I had a friend who worked at Shape for a bit. Though sadly at the time we didn't go to the Mundanium, and I presume it's the residue of what wasn't sort of burnt, because it wasn't in Brussels, and it got sort of partly destroyed by the occupying forces during the war, and then
it was literally next door. It's in the park, like just behind me. I admit I did not know it was there. It's a huge place. It's ridiculous. Yeah. Like the Arche du Cinquantenaire. It's like the in Paris l'Arche de la Défense. So this huge arc, but it's tiny. It's a little bit smaller here, but it's still ridiculous. And they have a semicircle it's just huge. And to imagine that it was, now it's 2 museums, a military one and one about primitive art, let's say. And to imagine that this was initially like the pre-digital version of Wikipedia or even the web, the internet, completely changed my way to see the place. I've been living for a couple of years here now, so it's kind of weird, but in a good way.
Yeah, because I have a copy of Livre sur Livre, which I sort of waded into, and in fact, I did find someone like Wikibooks, someone who started doing a translation. And in fact, I used an excerpt of that part of my thesis on the grounds that no one could tell me not to. It's an appendix, so it's a drive-by, sort of citation, but just as a way of putting it out in front of people, because when you actually look at what he was writing about, some of it is still pertinent and interesting.
Indeed, that's the kind of quality idea. Things that still progressed in couple of or in quite a few decades, and still some of it is not implemented yet. So that's some fruitful thinking and at a crazy scale. But it's not just philosophy. Like, he did the thing. And also, when I mentioned it on Twitter just earlier today, somebody, a contact of mine, mentioned that somebody just did his epistemology thesis on Paul Hotelet, and they already know of Freud's work, and they would be interested in presenting their thesis to the group soon. We need to find a moment to discuss when precisely, but yes. So that could be an interesting avenue. And in Mons, there is also a former, I think it was the Microsoft Innovation Center, but now they rebranded to something more neutral. And they work on VR. So there might be a way for us to see both the hardware side with some R&D and the historical side. And more importantly, then for us to build something. So it was more for the prototyping, not workshop, but session we would do in between two symposiums for like a hands-on, let's try something, and maybe less theoretical or academic side. So that's the suggestion.
Yeah, the context is fantastic, but what kind of a thing would this be? Would it be maybe the demo day, or would it be something completely different from the lab, or would it be a special lab camp day, or what? We could go camping. I mean, I didn't hear that. What?
I meant the demo day.
Demo day. Okay, that would make sense. I mean, as long as they would have us.
Yes, this because the idea was pretty fresh from this morning, and then to chat with the person doing the thesis on it, realizing it was literally next door a couple of decades ago. But I'm relatively confident we can find both a spot and a moment. Would you guys all want to come? That's another story, but I don't want to be too positive about it. But I mean, if we were going there to sell shoes, they would probably say no, or maybe. But here, I think we're pretty aligned, and we have things to show to prove that we're indeed on the same kind of reflection and action, actually, since we did the book, the demo, the symposium before, and the photo from the Linnean Society, how do you say, not underground, but a basement with cards. So don't want to sound too optimistic, but I think they might say yes.
Hi, Brandel. By the way, talking of photos and stuff from the book, I removed the pictures from the symposium because it added a little bit to the document, but it actually wasn't that big of a difference. So maybe I should put it back. What do you think? It's like between 100 and, instead of 109, it would have been 126. Should we keep the pictures in or not? Because it's over 100 anyway.
Keep the pictures. In for a dime, in for a dozen.
Yeah. Sadly, people look at the pictures. They might stay and read the text.
Yeah. The future of text Playboy.
Make that in for $1.
Yeah.
So
I also think we can keep it because people now share videos. They share 4K videos of hundreds of gigabytes. So for a book, I think it's good.
Yeah, no, I agree with you in general. The only concern I have is that I really wish the book was emailable, but it isn't. You know, it's above that. So that's just a little bit annoying.
But that's another interesting sort of reflection that comes out of this. Is what you know, it's again this tension between that if we work within the effectively the pre-existing metaphor of the book, we end up with something that's not as readily deliverable as we want. But we've also discussed separately this idea that you might effectively want to retrieve, as it were, a binding of some of the book. And the fact that we can't instantly do that doesn't bother me, because I think there's something interesting to pull out of that, because it rather tends to the fact that, okay, whilst I may not, there might be parts of the book that I don't read it originally. If there are things that I'm particularly interested in it, then being able to get that in a form that's sort of more tractable to me is actually quite interesting. And I say that without a fixed view of what that sort of lesser form is, but just the idea of being able to do that. This is obviously thinking without the sort of artificial boundary of sort of IP access or cost of access. But if you remove that sort of artificial structural complaint, that there's a real world one nonetheless, but if you remove that, then I think that opens up all sorts of interesting ways to move beyond the fixed notion of the book as a way for text distribution. Fabian.
I would also, if one of the worries, the practical email limit, I would make a low resolution that is less than 10 megabytes. And starting with, let's say, on page 2 or even on page 1 to say, hey, here is the URL for the full res version with even the different formats and everything that people need. So it can still be easily shared, but with a way to get it. Yeah, or even the future of text page itself could host a full-on even 1 gigabyte version. It doesn't shock me.
Yeah, I mean, what we have here is I have links. Here's the pictures. So that that's online. I don't know how big it is because it's all up now. But the individual pictures are reasonable, one by one. So that is linked from the book. But just wanted to show. Brantle, please go ahead. But this is what I'm going to show you while you're talking. We have this page now.
This is neat. I don't like files. I like URLs. I find that individual files I lose. I've completely given up on having a local file structure that I follow. And there's just a pile of files that I occasionally will put into dated bins, essentially. And so I would much rather reach for a URL that gives somebody access to a resource than to send them the file directly, because it tells more about the provenance of the specific thing. And to that end as well, in the same sense that it's almost nonsensical to give somebody a file of Wikipedia, but it may make sense to give people a file of a Wikipedia article. It's not quite at that same level of degree in terms of the differences, but giving people a book versus an article, particularly in the context of a book, which is a collection of fairly disparate articles, I think having facilities to be able to give PDFs of individual articles is good, like Mark was kind of alluding to with bindings, but that unless there's a clear, really specific, concrete use for somebody to have, recurrent use of a PDF of the entirety of the thing, then it means that they are carrying a lot of stuff that isn't relevant around in order to get at a piece that is. That's my piece.
Yeah, I am so tired of that piece. And the reason I'm tired of that piece is multiple fold. Just going to see if I managed to fix this layout issue here, by the way. Because obviously different information packaging for different uses, right? Hang on, I'm just going to put this on. A few people want to have a look to do checking, so I'm going to have it upload at the background. Okay. Stop. B, because Dropbox gets a bit confused. Right. Yeah, no, the reason is to go, considering we're all close intellectually, at least friends, in the sense that we're all making an effort, like, it can be a bit direct, but if we start from further out, it was quite often I would meet someone and finally we'd talk and say, I'm interested in text. And they would listen and say, okay, but what about video? What about pictures? And it's like, for crying out loud, I'm trying to do something in one area. So now when we're talking about books, I am not saying that we shouldn't have a monthly journal. We've tried it, but it just wasn't used. No one read it and cited something. Fabian has written a few pieces that went into the book where he's saying things like PDF is rubbish in VR, you know, things I don't agree with, but which is fine for me to cite, to refer to. So the idea of having a journal, if we want to do something to spread up the content of the book to have monthly releases, we can do that. But so far, I think, and I think we probably should, but most likely it'll just be the transcripts from the from the monthly guest meetings. So that's a little bit, but also, you know, I do make the content completely available to the community. So if anyone, either within or outside the community, want to wrap it in a different way, that's fine. And I have a provocation. I showed it to the other guys. I'm going to show it to you now. This, you can see my screen, right?
Yeah.
So I'll just wait for the update so it folds the book right. This is, this book is augmented PDF. This is selling my worldview, one of them. It's selling Reader, my software, and it's selling Visual Meta, my format. And I just have to be explicit about that now, because for quite a while I was all, oh, let's be neutral and all that nonsense. But no, you know, in the book, I've done the arrow things. I've done the glossary things, you know, so you can do things like this. You know, these are useful interactions, I think. And it is based on the media of a book. Now, if you want to do something different, as you have done, do it.
But
Yeah,
if
no,
go ahead, Brandel. Sorry, I'll cut you off.
No, that's fine.
Okay. So I was really responding to actually that point that Brandel picked up, and then you replied on, which is a sense, and this is very much from a both and rather than any sort of, you know, zero-sum ending. Is that I think there are two different things in tension here, because as we're rightly seeing, you're going through, you know, a lot of work with or without assistance from others in terms of creating what we're generally describing as a book. And at the same time, we're talking about the fact that for perfectly reasonable reasons, we sort of don't want a book. The question is, well, if we don't have a book, what do we do instead? Or more to the point, how do we bridge from culturally where we are to the sort of access that Brandel's referring to? So on one level, for those of us who understand, yeah, you can draw the map. So, okay, yes, what I conceptualize as a book is actually just these bunch of things. And if I know and understand how to get them, I can pull them apart separately. But there's actually quite a lot packed in there. And most of the people, and certainly most of the people not in this room, are that their starting perspective probably is understanding how a book is, and therefore if you wanted to find all the stuff about the future of text, you go get the book, even if you didn't want 90% of it. So there's an interesting thing, not perhaps to resolve today, but maybe after the book's away, is to circle back to and say, okay, so that's another sort of future of text thing that needs to be considered, not necessarily by the people in this grouping, but you know, almost in the wider evangelizing teaching perspective of moving us culturally on from our understanding of the book being preeminent in how we address getting information.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very important discussion, both on the future of text itself and for you know, for the community. Now, I just wanted to show you what I've been mucking about with here. This is obviously the map in author. These are all the defined terms, of course. Command D to read. There is a dialogue for doing the tags. The reason for that is it formats people, as I mentioned before, that I was planning to do as italic, places as bold, because places are big, and where is it? Yeah, normal concepts, just plain, and then organizations as bold italic. We should have an organization here. Let's see if we have Future Text Lab. Institution. Why is institution not showing up? The real reason I'm showing you this, guys, is it's an absolute freaking mess. I tried when this was quite clean to have down the left-hand side all the contributing people, and they didn't fit. Even when I make it small, it becomes a bit ridiculous. So it really highlights the extreme need for interaction. I mean, look at this. No, there's just not enough space. And yes, of course, when we go into VR, there will be more space. But, you know, come on, it's pretty cool, huh? Just, we need to spend another $100,000 on making it interactive. So that you can do layouts like, you know, show people in a circle. You've all seen some of Ted's work on this, right? Zigzag, where he has all these different views. You go from card to card. It's so cool. And Fabian, I believe the person you were referring to earlier who wants to present does that kind of graph work, right? According to the screenshot, at least.
Indeed, I'll put the link in.
Cool. So this is.
I mean, it's really interesting.
Sorry, I was just going to say this is our last.
I find these.
Okay. Go on,
You're going to
Mark.
say last
Sorry.
meeting.
How
No,
would we manage
on
every time to speak on top of each other? It's ridiculous.
You need to
I'm
implement
waiting for
Aloha.
applause.
We should be a chorus.
Okay, just quickly say you showed a graph, and I was thinking that, yeah, and showing the immediate problems of scale. So something that works in a tiny demo very rapidly falls apart when scale hits. And to me, that's one of the things I actually find most attractive when people talk about VR. That's the kind of data I want to be look at and playing with, mainly for the sake of having a big screen where we can be wasteful with pixels and things, because it's as big as it needs to be, and so we can concentrate on scaling for our understanding, not scaling for the display, which is, I think, where we're stuck at the moment. And what tends to happen also is we're also at a level where an awful lot of the display is stuck in the implementation layer, whereby a vast amount of quite niche knowledge is needed to sort of change anything. Potentially being able to sort of almost throw something into an enormous VR wall and just play with it, and use affordances that arrive contextually to the task you're doing. That's the thing I find really fascinating that VR can offer. And I know it's a long way from many of the other things one might do in VR, but I just thought I'd pin that to the wall as we passed. Sorry if I interrupted anyone.
That's a really, first of all, I've quoted you. It's a beautiful, here in chat, it's a beautiful sentence, but also we're getting closer and closer for that being useful, because there are now surface detectors in some of these systems, right, guys? So that means that if you specify what wall is what at home, and then you go to the office and you have, you know, authors on one wall and papers on another, whatever it might be, that should logically be able to carry on. And that would make I think that would make a big difference for exactly this kind of thing. And I would really like to see that. And I can't see anybody doing anything like that. You know, a problem with new media that I've seen is often something relatively obvious nobody does, because A, they're wondering if the big company will do it. B, it may not be impressive enough. And C, it still takes time and money. When are we going to have a meeting in VR, guys? Weren't we planning one? I mean, we can do it with a screen so that people join still, of course. And
You
if
said
so,
workrooms. I've never figured out whether you can use workrooms on Quest 1.
yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. It's sorry, I don't know if you've noticed, Brandel, but Fabian's wearing his Linnean tie. I'm looking for mine, and now I've asked Emma.
Yes, I wore mine to the Christmas party recently. It was fun.
Oh, see, Peter, you need to come to Europe. I know you have an orange tie because you're an orange man, but that's another story, another coolness. By the way, Mark, that's not how you wear a tie. It goes all the way around.
Oh, I thought you were gonna
Sorry, no.
have an argument about a Shelby versus a forehand versus a half and a full windshirt.
Oh, we don't have those sorts of arguments in public.
No. My comments on the Windsor Knot are unprintable. So actually, it is interesting. Funny thinking back to the actually the more serious point you were saying about having meetings. It's one of the things I found quite sort of interesting. It's sort of, in a sense, it's harder than I thought to read about another aspect that goes into use of VR for other than just sheer entertainment. It's the sort of thing about the mechanics of when you don't know how to do these things. So how do you meet up? Do you have to have defined this? You know, for instance, here's the thing that I mean, I unlike others in the room, I don't use the VR system as much. So I always get confused about whether you can I have a multiple defined safe areas, or do I have to define the thing every time I put the thing on? So for instance, I might want to have a meeting with you guys sitting down, whereas normally I would tend to stand up because I want to do more things. And these things are really, really, really hard to find out because everything is produced on the assumption that you are so involved or already know the answer. I mean, it's a classic problem of documentation, since time was that people basically write for themselves or the people they wish were using the thing. It's not for the people who are actually, the poor benighted people who are actually trying to use the thing.
So my understanding is that it has the ability to store multiple spaces, but it would, sometimes, frequently, it'll get confused between a single space and multiple representations of it as a safe space. If you haven't been able to get it to recognize it, then one will tend to re-register it, and then it'll sort of angrily alternate back and forth between the two representations. So in theory, you should be able to have a home and a work or a kitchen and a living room or something like that. But in practice, I found that rather than, for example, saying, this is this room, please use this for the love of God, at least on Quest 1, it'll just be like, is this a room I know? And you can be sometimes pleasantly surprised by returning to it. But in practice, I've largely all but given up on encoding larger spaces, and I just use a standing experience in a single position, and woe betide anybody who needs to move within the sort of the narrow circle that it particularly constructs for me. And that's because in the past, with outside in tracking, like one has with HTC Vive, which is what the fellow had at the back of the room in the Linnean. You're obliged to put physical trackers up, which I did in my lounge and in here when I was working with a Vive. And so the base expectations of most people working in VR were initially set by that, so that you'd have a single robustly kind of represented room and a single robustly robustly instrumented room, and then it would make sense for it to be sort of commensurately robustly represented logically within the system, and that one would expect to go to approximately that amount of effort to put it up, and hope in return that it would have an adequately robust representation that would be persistent. That, in my experience, has not turned out to be the case for Quest. And so I've gotten increasingly cavalier about representing it and saying, look, I just want to be in VR right now. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do anything it takes to do that. Get out of my way. So I don't know whether my experience is the common one, but yeah, to that end, like any aspect of representation of specific spaces and again, I'm on Quest 1, so that is 2 generations old now, is that it's never worth my time. And so I never do anything that makes it sort of lifted by that in terms of like, here's your keyboard, here's your desk. Like, I don't know if you'll even remember me.
Well, I mean, that's why I wrote that piece that I sent last week, how the default with these things should be an extended screen. You shouldn't have to enter a cartoonish cave and then launch an app and then wait forever and then, quite a long time to go in. They have to reset things and you have to scale things. I absolutely don't understand how that's just not done. But anyway, that's one of those things. So this is our last meeting before the launch. So we should probably talk a little bit about the launch. I'll be doing a 15-minute or so presentation, probably less, talking about a little bit of maybe the Doug Engelbart inspiration, because he was, you weren't there, Brandel, when we went through the beginning of this. Let me just, so this is what Fabienne suggested last Friday. That I should, because we're doing it on the 54th anniversary of Doug's demo, talk a little bit about him. So I went back to his demo, and this is what he actually says in the beginning. I remembered it slightly wrong. He asked, what if in your office, you as an intellectual worker were supplied with a computer display, backed up by computer which was alive for you all day, instantly responsive to every action you have? How much value could you derive from that? The first thing he says is computer display, not computer. So that's kind of a beautiful, poetic way for us to think, okay, he worked on a tiny little display. What would he have done? I think it's beautiful provocation.
Just one more thing, thinking about boundaries and things, is so when you're defining, if you're defining a boundary for sitting, the boundary, as I understand it, is defined vertically. So do you just assume that you're not going to slam your hand into the front of your desk? You might want to set the boundary so you slam your hand into a monitor you're sitting in front of.
No, but you do define your desk.
What's the design intent of the boundary in a sitting environment? Or are you not supposed to have anything on your desk?
You do define your desk. In Horizon Workroom and things like that, you do use the monitor. No, excuse me, you use your controller on the desk and then you draw the rectangle of it.
Right, okay.
No, but the thing is, and this is a really important point, you have a messy desk because that suits your work style. So there are a lot of assumptions about VR, but one of the ones that is a bit ridiculous is, always doing Tom Cruise Minority Report, heavy arms in the air. So I find that having the table defined when I use the keyboard is really, really important to have, also when you draw against something. And, I did even think about, would people have VR rooms so they can do room scale experiences? At some point, maybe in an office, but that's going to be a luxury. So I really do think that most VR will be room scale if we can define where the table is and furniture. But beyond that, most of it will be standing and sitting. That's my feeling. The dreams that Brandel has of VR while walking or AR while walking, I completely agree that will be wonderful. It will happen. But like pass through with this Quest Pro, it's okay, but it's not very good, and it's kind of jittery unless it's really bright in the room. So I've just stopped using it. It's actually annoying to have that.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because I wish I could easily film it for you, but it's so bad, and unless it's really bright in the room, that there's kind of like noise things happening everywhere in my periphery when I'm trying to focus.
Huh. Okay.
So yeah,
that's an interesting sort of sensory aspect there. So in a sense that, as people have done the pass-through because, why wouldn't color pass-through be better? It's more verisimilitude of what's outside. And actually, it's probably, in a sense, in the attempt to do that, you're actually just creating, in effect, not so much a sensory overload, but an unnecessary input that our eyes are not evolved, or our brains are not evolved yet to deal with.
The peripheral vision is attuned to motion, of course. So it is the worst possible place to put motion. It would be nice if you could do a room scan and then just make a virtual room, even if it's relatively rough, but things are roughly where they are. If somebody breaks into it, fine, show them as pass through. Fabien, you've had your hand up forever, I apologize.
So one way this is qualified is as room understanding, how the device is going to know not just where you are, but what's around you. I do virtual reality today because it works today. I think it's also interesting because, again, I can clean up, quote unquote, my room and be really somewhere else. But it's also a pragmatic process because I tried AR with, let's say, the HoloLens 2 or the Magic Leap or other devices. And it's been the promise for a while that the device will know where you are, what a chair is a chair, that it can move, all that. And so far, we've seen like rabbit ears and this kind of things. Which is cool, it's fun and all, but it's nowhere near saying, okay, this is a chair, this is a table, this is blah, blah, blah. We're still stuck to flat surfaces. And again, as also you said, for in good lighting condition, if you don't have enough light, it's hard. And then the same room with a different light, beginning of the day, end of the day, etc., devices are very confused. So in the long run, we are going to get there. In the short run, I need to work on stuff that works. Hopefully most of it, meaning working in space, will translate from one another. Not all of it, obviously, but a significant portion. But that's let's say the pragmatic aspect of it. Is like we work with devices today that we can recognize where they are. We can say, okay, I'm here. But beyond that, like I want to believe, but I think it might be a harder problem than it's being solved for a little bit longer.
There's also the counter issue, which is if there's too much light, it also doesn't work because the infrared sensors get overloaded. So I can't sit outside in the garden in VR, which is just weird. Brandel?
I think what people are discovering with the idea of augmented reality is that you're at the mercy of the quality of your understanding of what a camera is and how well a camera can perform in high and low light. And so what would probably make sense for somebody like Meta to do is to partner with an organization that has a lot of experience making good cameras and making images look good. And if there are any companies that have deep experience with making images look really good, then they would probably have a significant advantage in being able to make augmented reality work like that.
Yeah, but this, yeah, I don't know.
Fun fact from my marketing days: do you know what the most popular camera is?
Other than your phone, or is it your phone?
It is specifically the iPhone.
Sorry. Yeah, well, actually, that's okay. We have to talk a little bit about Friday, but on that point. So I'm a bit of a camera freak. I've been so my whole life. I used to roll my own film. So now I have this amazing Leica camera, 47 megapixels, absolutely amazing, blah, 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 which is fantastic for, let's call it art photography, to be pretentious, like a building or Edgar doing something interesting. But taking social pictures, the iPhone's much better. The computational photography, make sure that faces aren't too, badly lit and all that. It's insane how good it is. So if you don't want full control, if you just want a nice picture, there's absolutely nothing better. None of the high-end cameras either. If you want full control, it's something else. It goes for everything. But it's a nice little anecdote almost.
We forget.
Yeah, and that's Apple's adage, is to make it so that things that you don't need or want to dive into the fine-grained controls of are as best as very competent people can imagine they can be. And yeah, that can drive a lot of true professionals away from a platform because they really believe that they want that control at all times. But the reality is that sometimes some of that's true and some of it is just a trauma response to the defaults being poor. Sorry, Mark.
No, I was just thinking in the context something. I mean, it seems quite absurd. I dragged off to a family reunion, and so people were asked, bring pictures, and I was just amazed at actually how really poor most of the pictures I had, not necessarily ones taken by me, but by others. So these are, certainly from the color picture era. So you might say from the sort of early '60s onwards. And just actually how awful, truly awful they were in terms of quality to our modern sensibilities. And I used to, I had an A1 when it first came out, but I struggled to get good photos out of that. I mean, I wasn't developing them, so in fairness, it's been a crapshoot when it came to sending it off. But despite my best intents, most weren't great.
So Friday, launch event schedule. By the end of tomorrow, the book will be done. I'll put a folder up with all kinds of goodies, as in all kinds of ways to export it, including the whole thing. PDF, try to get it up on Amazon. I'll then look at book 1, which some of it I have turned into Author. The rest of it is in Illustrator. It would be nice to be able to have it in the same format, both the physical book and of course digitally. What is this code snippet metadata? Are we back on that?
Yeah, I mean, if there are a lot of format and all, and there is an easy way with visual meta to say this part is code, and that can be included, that would be nice. If it's impossible or very complex or whatnot, then there is no worries.
Give me an example how that would work, please. Let's say there is a bit of code, it's written in plain language, but the metadata knows it's code. Give me an example, please.
Yeah, just that code starts here, code ends there, maybe with an ID to make sure it doesn't get between two different, how do you say, book section or whatnot. But just saying that piece of text from here to there is code, nothing more. Ideally, all the metadata, like what type of code, is it JavaScript or something else? But even, yeah, anything would be a start.
Can you please send me an email requesting this? I will forward it to Jacob.
Yes, I'll do it right away.
Thank you. One of the things that I would like to see with such thing, of course, there is traditionally code is pre-formatted, so it's monospaced font, but I would also like to see it being really small, because unless you really, really want to read it, there's probably going to be quite a bit. So make it smaller, not so it can't be read, zoom in a little bit if you want to study it. But that means you can have a more useful bit of code, maybe. What do you think?
So ideally, if you have the right metadata, which is to say this is code and that code is JavaScript or HTML or Node.js or whatnot, then you can do syntax highlighting so that not just the different font, let's say monospace, but also some colors to say this is a function, this is a variable, this is blah, blah, blah. And that makes it, including for developers, readable, because otherwise it's a blob. We can still go through it and understand, but it's like 10 times harder. So again, just having the metadata, and let's say if you display it on using HTML, or if you render it back to a PDF, you can have this colorization, let's say, step that makes a huge difference.
Okay. I mean, one thing that is of course nice also is, forget his name right now, but I'm sure someone, particularly you, Brandl, will remember. But if you have numbers, for instance, in text, it would be very nice to be able to say what the numbers are. So you could even have a slider to change values and have an equation happen. What's his name again? You were muted.
Sure.
Brett Victor's Tangles.
Thank you. That just, to me, seems like a very, very low-hanging fruit. But the issue with that, of course, is the authoring environment, how to actually make that. The one thing I hate is CD-ROMs, the idea of CD-ROM, like an information ghetto. And now many web pages are the same kind of ghettos. We need to make that kind of amazing stuff. It needs to be just easy to do. Fabian?
I'm not sure that authoring is the right way to qualify this. The idea is not necessarily to publish something as much as to provide the concept with a sandbox to explore what has been published. So it's more than authoring to say, hey, here's the final version, but rather, hey, here is the version that I found more interesting or most interesting. And maybe you don't. Maybe if you change this or that, maybe you find something else. So it's a bit different than authoring.
Just forwarding your email. So this is very relevant to all of us. So I'm going to share screen. I'm forwarding this email to Jacob, and I need to implement it as a function in author. So let's say this is code. We have formatting here. So we should call it format, should be. What should the keyboard shortcut be? Command Shift C.
If I recall, most I mean, most things I think I use that have the ability to format for code don't have a shortcut because it's not used enough to warrant a shortcut, which are often in sort of short supply. So it's a consideration there. I mean, it's nice
Slack,
to have everything on a shortcut, but it's difficult.
Slack uses Command Shift C or Option Shift C for line of code or block of code, respectively.
Oh, okay. So it's not totally crazy.
No, yeah, and so a block of a line of code sort of implies that it's a single line, just your and it's similar to but not identical to the way that you writing in Slack and many other places. A backtick delimited section will be understood to be best represented in a monospace font as well, although often that's limited to a single term. You might just backtick a variable to indicate that it's a variable. Oh, sorry, like an API thing, like a specific named quantity. Yeah,
Because that seems to be taken up. I don't know whether it started with Markdown because everything's terribly derivative. You never quite know. But I mean, same. I know, for instance, so a lot of forums now use Markdown. So you use a single backtick for effectively the way you described, or 3 backticks on a separate line above and below, and that will do.
Yeah.
Also its best case, its best attempt to do syntax format coloring.
What font should we use if it's monospace?
Recursive. The recursive font family has the same font metrics across bold and italic. So if you use recursive and somebody applies syntax highlighting to format the code and they drop it in, it won't disrupt any of the column alignment.
It has to be a Mac OS default font. Because, yeah, or even a web font.
Recursive is free. There'd be no problem with downloading it and dropping a copy inside the app.
No. Because it's not inside the app. The fonts used in author are system fonts. Andele Mono. Brandel, is that a default Mac font?
I'm not familiar with the complement. Having worked in marketing, I tended to use a fairly extended font set and also make use of all of the actual Apple fonts, which are different from the Mac fonts. Apple fonts are ones that are exclusively reserved for Apple's use. So SF Pro Rounded, all of the things that exist on the watch and things like that, but they're not for other people to use. So I'm less familiar with that.
Right, because where is it? Okay, so here, if I open this, it's a big book we've got, guys. Format yourself, there we go. So if we go to the visual meta appendix, Yeah, so how many pages? Before we get to the appendices, we have 683 pages, right? So we all know visual meta. Yeah, let's just use Adam here.
Yeah, I think when I did visual meta for my thesis, my first attempt came out with 87 pages of metadata for visual meta. Yeah, at full point.
How about this? Adam, why is he there?
Sample author.
No, but it shouldn't be. This shouldn't be author based, should it? So, okay, Fabienne, you have to help me make this. Yes, I got. Do you want to say hi to everyone?
Daddy, Santa gave me a poster.
What? You got a postcard from Santa?
I've already had so many ones.
Hang on.
Daddy, and I didn't follow only my street fell like this. This is me.
That's very good, Edgar. I'm in a meeting, you know. Say hi to everyone before you go.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi, Edgar.
He's growing so massive, it's a bit frightening. Yeah, that's wonderful. Okay, tell Mama I need my linen tie, okay? Well, please look, even if it's in the ties, I'm just blind sometimes.
Also,
Right.
I think there should be a license.
Sorry, Peter, I can't. Edgar, please go outside and close the door, okay? Okay, yes, Peter, what were you saying?
Yes, there should also be a short one-line license field on the code snippet. So if someone had MIT license or they were using a GPL, they could just have that in with the metadata traveling with code.
Okay, hang on a second. Just going through the document here. Going to share screen with you. Okay, so here we have an actual code sample, right? So it's got all kinds of stuff going on. And it's long, which is fine, but what do we actually need to have in here? Sorry, I got to close.
Nothing needs to happen. Well, nothing is happening.
Non-self-closing door.
I mean, first of all, we have to, so this is a new bit of code, right? So we have to, do we have to say where it is, what page it is?
So I hope for you and for Jacob that it's not a new piece of code. Hopefully you already have ways to say code or other text segment is whatever and attach metadata to it. And hopefully just saying in something that doesn't even have to be visible, doesn't have to change font or anything like this, but from here to there, it's code.
Yeah,
and
but
ideally optionally language, and as Peter said, optionally also what license that code has, and maybe also optionally like a code a URL so that it has a code repository and a hash, but all that is optional. Just being able to say here to there is code, and then somebody can extract that code is the starting point.
But shouldn't, yeah, no, that's a starting point, but wouldn't it be useful if just like we have a glossary that's visible?
It would be.
In the visual meta as well, there's the glossary. So it's really clear, right? Name, description, and so on, right?
We really should be putting visual meta as comments inside code too.
I didn't hear that. Please repeat.
It gets tricky because if you start to do this and you talk like I do here about visual meta, things might break. You need to escape. It's hairy. I'm not saying it's It's not trivial. Let's me put it.
But one of the things about visual meta that's beneficial is that it's really small. So that means that it takes up, you can have a longer line. You don't have to be as scared of line breaks, even though they can be indicated with Pilcrow. But so you only want it to be saying code. I mean, in that case, you don't need any visual meta, Fabian. All you can do as an author is just write code sample starts, code sample ends, right?
So I will. What I'm saying is from exploiting the file at the end to use it in, let's say, a VR interface, but anything else, I need to know that that part is code, not visually but semantically. So that's it.
I understand, but this is a really deep discussion because, as I think we agree, metadata is data about data. It explains what other data is, right? So if you have an article and it has the name of the author beneath it, if there is no metadata to tell the reading software that that's actually the name of the author, the reading software has no semantic relationship with that name. It's just more words, right? So similarly, the only way the reading software will know that this is code is either it literally says code starts here, or it's formatted in a way that is parsable and understandable by the reading software, or finally, that it's in the visual meta as well, where it explicitly says something like, this is code. Because don't forget, the heading here, the reason I have access to it when I do this, which is, computationally, that is precisely because in the visual meta, we have this. So
Visually, I usually like to have a vertical rule alongside of code blocks. Just so they really stand out from the rest of text.
Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. But what I'm just saying is, this is a heading. It's saying to the system, this is a heading. Actually, maybe that's going to be our model. Oh, sorry, I've added this pasty bit. So maybe we can say this is code, like that. And then we say, yeah, we have to have a way to put it in there. I'm just going to, so I'm going to have license here, right? Which will be one of the options you talked about. What are the other options? Just to put in the options. Language?
Yeah, language is important. Repository, if there's a URL to take you out to some online location for it. Good, very good.
And then we have, what are we going to call the actual code then?
You could call it the code content, or the code source implies the, yeah.
Well, in literate programming, they often use fragment to describe the chunk of code. So you can say fragment or scrap, or terms that the LP world uses.
I think just source. Or should we just, instead of code here, should we call this? Yeah, just tell me, guys, this and this, what do we call it?
Looks good to me.
Come again, please.
Looks good to me.
Yeah, source is good in there.
Do you want to leave the author in, because you might be wanting to give attribution to someone? I mean, you might have written it yourself, i.e. as the author of the author doc, but you might actually be using somebody else's code and wish to get attribution.
And an optional contact email. It really helps if you have a faster way to shoot an email off to the person who wrote something.
So,
Yeah, perfect.
Something else, and I don't know how to do this, but it would be like the executable environment, because you can know the language it is, but do you want to run it on a
Right,
headless
run under Node or in the browser?
on a browser, something like this. So, and I actually don't know. There are things like what you say, Docker, but it's not. I don't actually know how to do that.
Execution environment is supposed to executable.
Yeah, but is there a standard for it? Because usually people share specification. Let's say you need a Windows machine with this OS and those hardware requirements, but the context in which it's used, this I don't know. I don't know of standard for this.
Well, the thing is, in fairness, I think it's a sensible idea. And the fact is, the concept of the visual meta is that something that can pass the visual meta should be able to burrow its way down. And as long as we make things relatively self-explanatory. So if the visual meta is saying, these are the things in a code block, then even if you have to loop around, or you might need to change a parser, for the next time you meet this, I think that would address your issue, because I think it's a really useful thing to have in there, potentially, how you want to interact with that, because that is a really useful handhold.
So something funny to go also there, and because we talk a lot about VR and AR, is also, so we have the execution environment, the software, hardware requirements. I guess we mostly think about, well, I don't know, but also then because we talk about VR and AR and non-VR and AR, is it something to be spatially experienced? Is it something that is mobile, or it's not just like the format, but you need to physically move to experience this? And same, I don't know any standard for this.
Well, this is a fantastic discussion, guys. I would love to have this built, but even if it isn't, this is really, truly useful. XR equals yes, or should we have AR, VR, XR, or no, don't pretend you know the world. This is for you and Brandel. What makes sense? Oh, also you, Peter, even though you don't do much coding in here, you have perfectly valid. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm going to get dressed now. Yeah, how would you like that formatted?
I'm not joking when I say I don't know. It's like, because if you just say XR, it's not sufficient, because some of this, if it's VR or AR, it's not the same. If it's standing versus needing like a 10 by 10, how do you say, workspace or Guardian, it's not the same. So I'm not sure how to say it.
Well, let's just figure it out.
What in Steam, for example, it's standing versus I even forgot room scale, but I don't think it's sufficient.
Well, so I don't. My determinant generally is, what will I do with it? What is the practical consequence of including this for something that I will do? You can't run this code. It's just, one would expect typically for this to be a small enough snippet that it, and sort of divorced enough from the context in which it could be runnable, that it's really only going to be present within the context of a book for illustration purposes. So to that end, unless you want to define a sort of a dynamic, smart computational notebook format, which Visual Meta currently isn't, then I don't know what I would do with the distinction between it being XR or not.
Well, that's why I added this thing that I've highlighted, where I'm calling it insert. Obviously not a right term, but I'm thinking, if you are in a VR environment and you're reading a PDF, with this in it, can we have a label for this thing can actually fit into this larger code? So imagine you're running a room thing, and then this specific code is for including into this.
Oh, right. As a hyperlink to a place to pull down the working source for it.
No, that's the opposite, but that's also important. I'm more thinking, because, okay, I'm now in Fabien's fabulous environment, right? I'm working on stuff and I have text floating that I can do things running, right? Now I get this article and he has written a bit of code, and instead of this copy and paste and move it in, if this document has said, because it has the execution environment equal Fabien's fabulous room, then maybe this insert, there's something here that can say, I can literally drag it out into space and it becomes a flower. Whatever it might be, like an interactive flower, but so it knows where it is. Remember, we're not tied to 2D and print anymore. This is designed to be read in a magical way, right?
So do you mean like a position within an existing workspace, a specialized workspace, or
Well, let's follow along. Sorry, I just forgot these commas. Let's just follow along that scenario. We're literally in your space. You're reading an article, and Brandel has written a little snippet that is a ruler that works in VR space, like a little gadget. And he's written it in JavaScript or whatever works. And there is some kind of a thing here that says that if you are in a known environment, you can pull it out and then it becomes parsable by the running room, which is what you have. And then it just magically becomes a ruler.
so that's kind of the point of the whole thing. So I absolutely can imagine. Then I would expect that the code itself has a shape or a 3D model attached to it. Let's say if it is defined as, let's say, execution environment, my thingy, and then VR, and I'm in VR, and root scale, yes, and I'm in root scale, so it's compatible with the environment I'm trying to run it in. Then expect itself to have a model attached, a kind of visualization of what it is, let's say a GLB file, for example, or something like this. I don't think it has to be in the metadata.
No, I'm just combining what you said and what Brandel said. Here's a link to resources, which is that 3D model or whatever. But, and I'm not saying we should call it insert, maybe it doesn't even need to be something, but let's imagine that, I mean, if it's just a code snippet, then in a sense, who cares, right? Then you just make it monospaced and don't worry about it. But how magical will it be? Because one of the things that could be, let's say it's let's say that Mark has written a script even, that all it does is it removes all mentions of Bob Horn, for instance, and then it makes Peter's in a certain specific space, whatever it might be, but it's in a document and you're reading in the document, you can take it out. Wouldn't that be useful? And is that completely crazy?
Not at all crazy. I think maybe we should introduce the notion of a list of filters that could be applied. In working on my literate programming tool project, I've been looking at how the listings package works and how the LaTeX tooling supports embedding programming languages. And one of the things that they'll do is basically have escape characters embedded in the source code that appear in a comment position in the source code. So provided the escape characters are in a comment in the source code language, you can embed second level directives in there. So type in the chat, for instance, if you want to do a link to a specific line inside the code, you might use the option J character on the Mac keyboard inside of a comment. So you'll have, say, the source level comment / comment text here. I'll have a samples coming in / Okay, I'll be hitting enter in a second for you. Okay, so right here, we're using Option J on the Mac keyboard to escape to LaTeX inside of a comment inside of the programming language. Then inside of that, you have the LaTeX directive to establish a Z label. So
All right.
what we do is have a filter to indicate which things are there. So you could have, the filter field could name a literate programming tool that's designed to read through that code. So sort of like, meta language, maybe meta language could be good. Yeah, meta language in addition to language. So the meta language would be some filter that's able to recognize the code in that language. The code's already valid in the target programming language, but there's also embedded within that meta level directives, and the meta language would be what filter program to run on the code in order to be able to get at that extra information.
Yeah, okay. Well, we're a little ahead of things now. One of the things I need to know from everybody is if we do such a thing and you are in a VR environment, what is the point of this? Why not just have it as monospaced font for a human to copy?
But you need to know that there is code there. So if you read the entire book and you can access it as text itself, you should be able to copy it. But then you still need to know, like, where can I run this and all. So I think being able to, the same way you find images, you skim through a book to see the images and see how you can play with it. I think being able to identify that, this will be a part you can play with rather than just look at is enable new usages, more interactive usages with the content. Because again, otherwise, if you just go back to reading a book from a more passive standpoint of looking at pages of text, then it's not that interesting. And I wouldn't read a book as I read a paper book without interacting in it in VR. Like, I don't think it's worthwhile. But if you can play with it, not just the outside of it, but what's in it, because you're in a, like, if I read a book, sorry, if I read my physical book, my mind is the executable environment that the text of that book goes in. If I read a book on a computer or in a VR headset, then I have an execution environment that I can use to execute whatever code there would be in it. So, of course, you can do without. You don't need, let's say, the any metadata, but then you need to manually find what it is, discover all this. So it's a lot less, like, nobody would do it, basically.
Okay, so if we look at your example here, number one, it is just for the system to know that it's code, period, right?
Yes.
Yeah, because another useful thing it does is when you copy it, say to the clipboard, for the most trivial reuse, that it doesn't do things like decide it's going to change tabs into spaces or vice versa, because some computer language that makes it unusable.
And also when you copy from reader, it adds all kinds of stuff. In this case, it wouldn't add anything. That's a key.
Yeah.
But so this notion of, I mean, I'm going to ask you, Brandl, because you've been the most critical of this kind of. Would you ever want to put a piece of code in a book to be, when you read it in VR, to do a thing? If you knew, for instance, that the reading environment was known to you, so maybe you could write something for Mozilla Hubs for the sake of argument.
I wouldn't write a book. I use the web, and the web is where text lives for me. So this is useful, but like the very first thing I would do, I don't write in any other programming languages. I write in JavaScript. So I would convert it to web formats and documents and content. And that's the very first thing I do with anything. And part of it is that I'm much better at JavaScript than other languages, but part of it is the philosophical benefits of things living first class as web elements. But you know, my bias is really crystal clear. Like, I work with Safari, I work on the web, I was raised on the internet, I've been there since 1993. So by book, yes, certainly I would make an electronic document, but where it would live is in the web, and so the sort of the formatting, the micro formatting of that information, maybe, but yeah,
That's absolutely fine. I don't have any problems with that. But if it's living on the web, would it just then be code in HTML? How would you deal with it in that case?
it would be because it would be hypertextual. It's likely that I would pull this information from the destination resource. So I would actually only really need one URI to that thing, and then scrape whatever schema the code itself had. So if that was a GitHub URL or a node package or something like that, then I would probably tend to reach into it in order to retrieve that. And that's, you know, one of the big questions that I have about hypertextuality and linkness is what do you embed in the source document as a reference to the destination, and where, you know, I think there are real challenges as to, like, how much do you trust that resource sort of exists, and so how much do you need to do the work of it in order for people to be able to kind of know what they're going to get when they land there.
Last Friday was the 74th anniversary of Doug's epiphany, Carl told me. And he pointed to the videos
awesome.
that I had recorded of him saying this. Those videos are no longer playable. They're QuickTime format. Right? Link rot is a real serious issue. You know, I want this to be usable now, but I also want this to be entirely readable in 1,000 years. You know, that's my minimum philosophical distance. So I'm very happy to hyperlink things, but I also want things to be self-contained in a capsule at the point of publication. The point of working on something is one thing, but at a certain point, you're painting a picture, you got to hang it on the damn wall. So this is the hanging it on the damn wall moment. So yeah, we have some URLs in here. I'm happy with that. But do we want, whether it's on a web page or not, do we want some code available to be there? Because GitHub is not going to be around for 1,000 years or 100. I mean, look at how much we've lost of digital text already. So it's not against what you're saying, Brandel, but it's complementary to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the question then is, yeah, like, how much trust can you have in things? And I absolutely agree. You know, GitHub being Microsoft being a thing that, you know, is beholden to various sort of forces, containing certain attendant costs. But then, yeah, is this going to be? Would people put runnable code in a book? Maybe. Would they want? The thing is with code is that if it's runnable, it's probably too complex to want to have it sort of visually included in its entirety, because what you want to run is different to what you want to show, and so yeah, like some people put some effort into making code that's runnable be terse enough to be illustrative. Shader Toy and P5JS are examples of where people do that. But yeah, like often the code that you'd tell with versus the code that you would show are different. So I'm torn there, because I think it's absolutely valid that you know, things fall apart, the center cannot hold, all that kind of stuff. You know, the service is temporarily unavailable. So yes, I would put code in a book. I think I wouldn't show the same code that I would run. And so you would probably need to have some kind of separate faculty for sort of containing the entirety of the stuff that somebody would want to actually execute.
I just added that here. Is there a better way of doing it? I'm sure there is. Show lines, how many lines of code to show at the location in the document. So the rest of it can be just hidden away in visual meta. Something like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
That would also let us have references to the same piece of code in visual meta at different points in the document, showing different subsets of the line numbers.
Okay.
So in one spot in the document, we might want lines 1 to 8 versus somewhere else we want 9 to 14. And then further on in the document, you might want lines 15 to 20.
Yeah.
Okay, how about this? How about a list of excerpts, a dictionary format? So you could have like the excerpt name coupled with a range of lines.
Yeah, let me think about that, because
Yeah,
that
named
gets,
excerpts, I think, would be the way to go.
that becomes quite sophisticated. But I see both Mark and Fabian, but I think you're first, Mark. Well, we'll keep that in mind.
Okay, very quick one. It doesn't have to sort of come in at any point. I was just an observation that came to mind when I was thinking about sort of looking at the fact that you've got these yes/no questions that probably want to collapse to open lists, which led me to think that actually part of the thing you might want to do, if you've got a book with 400 code samples, like us not, you probably, much of that information may back off onto the same metadata. I'm not suggesting we go down that rabbit hole now, but in a sense, this was half the joy and the idea of the visual meta. And think about the comments we had with Chris Guthridge sort of moons ago, is that as long as we can provide enough information for those with the need to go effectively dereference stuff, assuming that reference exists, which is, so there's a judgment as to how much you put in. But by the same token, if we look at the size of the visual meta that's already going in this book, the flip side is if you take everything with you, each monolithic resource can become almost unfeasibly heavy, even in a modern digital environment. So there's a subtle interplay. But it may well be that if you're going to, for code heavy use in a visual meta book, you might want to be able to effectively identify effectively this snippet of code and what this code is, and then point to or perhaps it might have its own lookup URL, but beyond that, most of it might back off onto a sort of another bit of the visual dictionary saying what its usage is. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. What to include and what not to include is a big, massive issue. Absolutely. Fabian, I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah, I had too many thoughts and we have 5 minutes, so I'm just going to go back to the prototypist mindset, which is to be as cheap as possible. So most of the discussion actually was more interesting than I expected, I admit, but it does raise a bunch of questions. But as long as there is a starting point, which is like, this is code, this is not code, that code can eventually be used somehow. I think that is quite interesting. Everything that is optional should be considered after, and also, as Brundle was saying, it's not just what it is, but how it's going to be used. So before diving too deep and eventually postponing and going further and further, the strict minimum, and eventually saying that, yeah, actually playing with it is maybe even more interesting than the text around it, or maybe not. So as parsimonious as possible, and also because otherwise maybe there is literally no code to add. Maybe the way that Jacob has authored the tool makes it so that this is yet another type of text, and that can be handled right there. All the discussion it started to bring, I think, were very valuable, but in terms of actual implementation, like the strict minimum is probably going to be more productive for everyone.
Yeah,
I'm definitely for that.
As far as I'm concerned, this is definitely a part of the future of text. I don't think we can do it by Friday, no, but that really doesn't matter. Deadlines help, right? Getting to another step. And the idea of computational notebooks, I am 100% for. But I think that computational notebooks can live like this. that it can be entirely flat visual meta. And the reason I have to just repeat, so you don't think I'm completely old-fashioned, visual meta exists only for robustness. That's it.
Mm.
Right? It is not an optimal format at all. But it's just the notion, because the notion of Harry Potter. Let's whether we like all of, to open up a book, and in the future, what do we want? We want all the pictures to be able to be put on the wall automatically. We've talked about that a few times, right? There is a timeline in this. We want to be able to have the timeline somewhere. All the references should go somewhere. A lot of the metadata is there to support that. But if we could actually have, you're reading and there's a widget, let's call it a widget, that you can literally pull out in a fabulous Fabienne type of environment, that's really powerful. That you can share things like that. But of course, we get up into the issue of, to make something useful, very often you need way too much code.
So for sort of also an interesting thing that occurs to me as we talk of this, of course, we're talking about code, but if you expand the notion outwards, like towards sort of what Bob and Jim have been talking about in terms of structuring the document, the ideas, you could almost see a similar sort of hinting going on, playing into the visual meta. So this section of this is a hypothesis, or or this is something you might use there. So when you did a deconstruction in a virtual environment, you maybe wanted to pull it apart, that all the hypotheses might go and land in one corner. They're all handholds, they're metadata handholds to help you do stuff, make them tractable. I don't think it's something to get into today, but I really just raised that because something we might maybe circle back to another day.
Give us a few use cases, guys. We have 2 minutes, 1 minute and a half. If we don't have use cases, we have nothing, right?
The ruler example was interesting, but that's of course a little bit prompted by the discussion. Being able, just to play with the code itself, the content, I think is quite interesting, because going to look back, like for the next, let's say, edition, do we had not just the book itself as a thing to read and explore with, but do we, each of us, write little cut snippet that will be tools usable in the way to read that book?
So that's an interesting aspect, and as a sort of as a provocation for the next year is one of the things is to make the previous editions of the book more usable, using the ideas that we've actually surfaced since starting to make it. So I mentioned that in the sense that there's that means you haven't got to go and write a whole new article or have a whole new idea, but rather you can take something and say, well, what couldn't I do with this that I wish I could do? But I now have an existing thing that's out there, that's a sort of published thing that in other words, so I don't have to play with that. What I can begin to work with is what more could I do with this?
So is this all you want now, Brando? Excuse me, Fabian.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's all we know we want. There are a path to a full copy would be good, but your point is well made about the availability of this resources. But yeah, like given that, if we want the absolute minimal closure, that's it.
Okay, I'll send. Jacob is very.
Oh, one thing just to mention, Tim, because it doesn't say it explicitly in there, is this point that if it's code, is you don't mess with the white space. So if it's a tab, it's a tab, and it may not look right.
I've put it here.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Oh no, that's a different thing. So when you select some text and say make it code, that nothing gets futzed with, because that could be that could break the code.
Yeah, good point. All right, boom, send it, see what happens, and yeah, so there are many things we need to go further with, especially this stuff. I really hope we can go into MVR environment for this. It's getting a bit insane. But at least it is actually still interactive. Look at that. Isn't that cool?
Yeah, that's really cool. I wonder
It's
if
useful.
does Noda have automatic layouts? Does it allow you to do?
I don't think it does. I mean, this is the thing I was noodling with, because essentially I did something like that, put it in Node, and I thought, right, I've just moved my problem to a new space, and I haven't actually got much further, apart from it's 3-dimensional. But I'll go and have a look, because they're beginning to interact with one or two other things. I mean, they're falling foul of the usual thing that happens with anything these days, is someone saying, well, can I have it on this platform? And I must have it everywhere, every time, for a reason I haven't quite worked out, but my life will end if I don't have it. And unfortunately, much more interesting things like how what you do, because unsurprisingly, their starting place was that you were working at a human scale problem, and you were literally making each bit by hand. And quite quickly, people said, well, that's lovely, but what I really want to do is I want to take this structure or this thing and bring it in and then work on it. And the question comes, what is the initial layout? There's certainly no auto layout, but I don't think it's impossible there could be. So I'll go and dig into that.
So yeah, D3 does stuff. I was just like Herald Core and fast multi-scale. I would be curious what Elio's auto layouts were, because I believe that he had some stuff there automatically right now. But yeah, that would be really cool to play with the graph, and I'll think about what sort of contexts have what kinds of abilities to do auto spatial layouts. Sort of.
Yeah, that's something that Jacob has said he's just not good at. So if you guys want to work on that, God, I would love to join that conversation.
It's kind of the point of the presentation, like what a week ago on librarian moving the walls around. It's like, if you want to scale, you need some layout. If you have a couple of layouts that are easy, let's say you project forward, but then at some point, if you have a deeper data structure, let's say a graph, then that's what you might want to use. It's part of the earliest issue I open about the little exploration scaffolding I've made. It's like, okay, you have layouts, you repeat the same thing over and over again, but then you have like grammar graphics, you have like a lot of really fascinating work in this. And then most of it is still 2D. Rarely is it 3D, and even less explorable in XR as far as I can tell. But for sure interesting to play with.
Yeah.
Just changing a sentence in our book.
Because one of the issues with just while you're doing that, I think the map thing is whether you're starting from there's a sort of line somewhere where you go between an outline and a hypertext. Is there a single link between things, or are there many effective links, whether they're implicit or explicit, in terms of why you're linking something? Because that's probably one of the ways you might be using your selectors to say, actually, I just want to see the green things now. Oh, and I want the blue things over there, but I don't want any of the red things. I'm using very simplistic notions for it. But it's actually, of course, more complicated, and it broadly brings you back to, well, if you didn't put a label on it in the first place, you're stuffed. Doesn't matter how much cleverness you want to throw at it, which is the sort of conceit of a lot of our mechanization at the moment, is we assume that there's a button that says show me result, and it turns out it shows you what you put in, which wasn't really what you were asking.
I want to share my screen so you don't think I'm just on Facebook.
I've got a job for a meeting, but thanks. It's fun, useful thinking.
Well, hang on before you go. I know you gotta go. I respect all that work stuff, but look at this. Look at the sentence there. This is the current view of the book as a graph and author. By the end of 2023, I dream to see this as a multi-wall VR experience. because it's a mess.
Yeah, no, I absolutely support that sentiment, and I look forward to the technical and conceptual sort of advances that will help facilitate it.
Okay, see you Friday.
Take care. Bye.
Drop as well.
Everybody.
Bye.
Don't go if you don't have to. If anybody has chance to, oh, where are you all going? Okay, fine. All right, Peter, I'll see you on Friday. Bye.
Bye-bye.